The idea is to really push us to think about how can you say that you are anti-racist or you embrace anti-racism while simultaneously promoting and upholding white supremacy ideology?
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa Di Donato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm. Today on the Amplify Nursing podcast, we talk with Dr. Hafeeza Anchrum, a postdoctoral fellow in the Penn program on race, science, and society. Curious about the history of nurses that shared experiences similar to her, she recently completed a doctoral degree capturing the oral history of Black nurses and their struggle for equality during the Civil Rights Movement. Growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, as a child of a mother of the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Anchrum understood the need to preserve these stories due to a scarcity of historical scholarship about Black nurses. Today, we talk with Dr. Anchrum about her early experiences in the profession, the inequities baked into the educational system, and who gets to tell the history of nursing, what's being taught, and whose work is celebrated.
Hafeeza, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, we're really happy. Yeah, we're really happy to have you. I've been a big fan of your work ever since I came to listen to you talk about one of your dissertation chapters. I found the work fascinating, and I've been really excited and probably annoying emailing you to come and talk to us. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for continue to email. I did not forget. I was just trying to finish that monster of a dissertation.
Yeah.
I finished. Woo!
Congratulations. Congratulations. So why don't you tell us, how did you come into nursing?
Well, I guess I'll say I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and I attended Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida for nursing school. I am not one of those people who grew up always wanting to be a nurse. I didn't know anything about nursing. I wasn't even sure what I even wanted to study in undergrad. My mother suggested that I choose a major where when I graduated, I would for sure get a job. So my choosing of nursing was about job security. And that actually, I think, is the story of a lot of folk who come from marginalized communities because, this is about the politics of choice, right? And who really has choice. And, some things are sort of, I don't want to say handed to you, but, they're limited. And for some of us, the limit is that the sky is the limit. And for others, the limit is the sky. That's why I chose nursing. I had all of these. It's interesting. Okay. So, and the same thing happens. I think the same thing happens today where, you're kind of told these tracks that are popular. Everyone is either going to be a doctor or you're going to go to law school. And I think if you're at Penn now, it's Wharton, those are like the big, big three. And you sort of feel as an undergrad, I think, kind of forced to choose between those three, and you don't really have the opportunity to expand. And maybe the first couple of years, you might take a few different courses, but you kind of got to figure it out pretty soon. You don't have a whole lot of time to waste. And we know tuition is high. And so when my mom suggested nursing, and I had all of these oh, that was my point. I had all of these science courses. I had taken bio and chem and organic chemistry and animal diversity. I had taken all of these science courses. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. And when she suggested nursing, and I went over to the nursing school, and I was overqualified because I had all of these math courses, I had all of this stuff. But there were still some prereqs that, that are very specific to nursing that I didn't have. But that's how I ended up in nursing. It was about job security, and I liked the idea that I could live anywhere I wanted. Nursing is, there are a lot of benefits in nursing, and one of them is, you can live wherever you want. So that's how I ended up in nursing. And I have to say, I didn't like nursing school, and really didn't like nursing when I graduated. And I don't think that that's uncommon either. Nursing school is hard. I also had some experiences in nursing school that really turned me off. Yeah. So when I graduated, me and a group of friends, we had sort of this pact that we were all going to go to New York because it's nursing and you can go anywhere you want. Well, I went first. They never came. They never ended up coming. So I was in the Big Apple and working at, big hospital. And that's where it sort of started for me. Yeah. And I worked as cardiothoracic and perioperative nursing. And I thought about anesthesia, but I remembered a professor that I had when I was at Florida State. She was great. She was a psych NP, and I had mentioned to her that I was thinking about CRNA, and she said, your personality, you're so outgoing. I can't see you in the OR. You need to be around people. And be honest, I can't do the OR because it's too cold. It's just too cold. I wouldn't have made, I mean, I was freezing in the vacuum, but the OR, forget about it. So that she kind of convinced me to pursue something else that I guess would be more interactive. I don't know, but yeah, so that's I was at the bedside not long. Did about 2.5 years in cardiothoracic, then went into PACU, loved PACU. Just love it. It was really catered, to my personality. You have to be very spontaneous. You have to like change to be in to work in PACU because things change and they change very quickly. And you don't know what you're going to get. That was what I love. Cardiothoracic, after a while, you learn, because it's the same open heart cases over and over again. But PACU was so many different types of cases, and you didn't know when you went to work. Today might be the kidney day. Today might be ortho day. You just, and then we had 3 recovery rooms. So sometimes I would be up there with the mothers and babies, and it was wonderful. But then, I got burned out quick bedside nursing, and so I went to, while I was still working, I did my master's. I went to NYU. And earned a master's in nursing education is what I focused on. So that sort of was where I started.
That's a great trajectory. And I think that I think I would agree with you. Most people don't like nursing school. I feel like nursing is portrayed so differently than what it actually is, so that no one really has an idea what they're getting themselves into until they're in it. And then you're like, what?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then you really don't, I feel you don't really learn how to be a nurse until you're in it, After I completed my master's, I then sort of stayed in the same hospital system. I was hired as a clinical nurse educator. And that was a really interesting role because now I could see it from both sides. I had the experience as a bedside nurse and now sort of in administration. It was very interesting and a very difficult job because you're in the middle. You're sort of being pulled in multiple directions from executive leadership, and then you have the nurses, and I was work closely with the managers. So how I ended up at Penn, I'll tell you. So one of my responsibilities as an educator was that I was supposed to coordinate the activities for Nurses Week. And One year I did kind of like a informal type of survey where I was asking the nurses about the nurse pioneers, leaders who they knew in nursing, and everybody kept naming the same folks, and you know who they are, Nightingale and Doc. And so what struck me was what stuck out was that no one could name any Black nurse leaders,
Mhm.
including the Black nurses. I said, well, that there is an origin here. And so I became very curious about the history of, folk in nursing who shared my experiences. And so I started doing a little, I knew that I knew I wanted to go for the PhD. I just wasn't sure. And I knew I didn't want to do science. That was the thing. Um, and I think I received one of those emails from Penn, and I saw that there was a history center.
Mhm.
I was like, what? you know? Oh, okay. I didn't even know this was an option because all you hear about is science,
Mhm.
especially in the hospital. Nobody's, nursing history is quite celebratory outside of and not necessarily outside of the academic space, because even in the academy, it could be quite celebratory. But once I saw that there was this field of nursing history, and I signed up for, the PhD open house. And when I came, Dr. Connolly, Cynthia Connolly, was on the panel, and I heard her talk about the Bates Center, and I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to study Black nurses. And that's how I ended up at Penn. Yeah.
That's such a great story.
Yeah.
I love that origin story about how everything in your career flowed and took you to this point.
Mhm.
So when you get accepted into the PhD program at Penn and you start to do your research, what did you do your dissertation on?
So my dissertation focused on Mercy Douglas Hospital School of Nursing. I used the institution as a historical case study to examine the professional development of Black nurses and their struggle for racial equality during the civil rights movement. The Bates Center has the Mercy Douglas collection, so it was I like to think it was waiting for me, honestly. Because no one had done any real serious work on this collection, and I took a look at it and I said, yeah, this is what I want to study. This is what I want to focus on. History is interesting in how you go about it. You can kind of come in with your research questions, or you can take a look at, sort of the records and think about, what is it that you see, and, your questions and your theories kind of emerge out of the records. And that's what happened. There is, as you probably know, a dearth of historical scholarship about Black nurses. And so it's really a wide open field. There's so much work to be done. And we know very little about the experiences of Black nurses after World War II. I mean, it's just a silence, resounding silence in the literature. So Mercy Douglas, I'll just say a little bit about it, was a Black-run hospital and nursing school in Philadelphia. In fact, it was on Woodland between 50th and 51st Street. If you go up there, you'll actually still see remnants of the institution. It's been demolished, but they have like the driveway where they used to bring in the ambulance. It was really incredible. The first time I went over there, I became a bit emotional because I relied heavily on oral history in my work. And so I had the stories that these nurses had told me in my head as I was walking through the community. And I could picture everything. I could picture the nursing quarters, the hospital. Mount Zion Baptist Church, which was sort of the spiritual arm of the hospital, is still there and open. You can go there on Sunday for worship service if you want. I actually gave a whole spiel to the church about my project, and after people came to me and they were like, my grandmama used to work at Mercy Douglas, and I knew somebody, I was born at Mercy Douglas, all these stories of people in the community. That's just amazing. But it was one of the few Black-run, Black-controlled hospitals and nursing schools in the country. What I wanted to what I was looking at is how did Black nurses sort of survive this turbulent period of desegregation, right?
Mhm.
Where conventions around race and gender were changing, but they were gradually changing. And not only Black nurses, but Black Americans in general were facing so much white resistance.
Mhm.
And though nursing was the first of the health professions to sort of formally desegregate, opportunities for Black women in nursing were still sort of extremely circumscribed. So it wasn't until the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that, nursing was really forced to desegregate, just like hospitals and medicine. So anyway, I concluded that, it was these Black run hospitals, I said, that served as like I call it like a life vest. They kept the Black nursing profession afloat until Jim Crow was dismantled.
Mhm.
Although that was not the intent. Mercy Douglas wanted to survive integration. They wanted to still be standing when the smoke cleared. But racial caste in healthcare mirrored, broader society. Black hospitals were challenged by structural racism and inequality. They didn't, separate but unequal.
Mhm.
It was universal. It was in healthcare as well. And so the hospital and nursing school was chronically underfunded and under-resourced. And though integration didn't necessarily close the institution, it played a major role. But at the end of the day, it was about systemic racism, racial repression. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's it's an absolutely beautiful story. My dissertation was just so rich. And, I knew it was going to be a social history, but it ended up being political history, a cultural history, a labor history. I mean, that chapter that I believe that you heard me read, that ended up being a labor history chapter. And it's a story about resistance. It's a story about community. It was the community that did a lot of work to not only establish these institutions, but to keep them open. And folk were doing everything from fundraising to donating equipment and supplies. Black women were sewing sheets and towels and curtains. I mean, it was anything that they were donating, food, anything that you could give to keep the institution alive. But I should say that Mercy Douglas was the product of the merging of two hospitals. These were two Black hospitals in Philadelphia. Philly has just an incredibly rich healthcare history, Black healthcare history. It was Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital was the first, that was founded in 1895 by Dr. Nathan Moselle. The second was Mercy Hospital, which was founded by Dr. Eugene Henson and some medical colleagues. And those two hospitals eventually merged in 1948 and formed Mercy Douglas. The nursing school closed in 1960. The hospital held on for a bit and closed in 1973.
First of all, there's so many things that I have questions about. You had the opportunity to speak to nurses that actually went through the nursing program at Mercy Douglas.
Yeah. So I interviewed, I think, a total of about 20 nurses. I also interviewed a couple of nurses, Black nurses that attended Jefferson as well. Yeah, they're in their late 80s, early 90s. I think the oldest nurse I interviewed was 91. Her memory was sharp. I mean, it was just incredible what they could remember. And oral history, when you talk about innovation, historians are always looking for new ways to advance historical research through innovative theories and methodology. We use digital humanities, public history, oral history. And so, the oral tradition is something that has been incredibly significant to the Black community for a long time because the power dynamic that exists in society also lives in the records. Whose stories get told, whose stories get preserved, whose get documented. The records can also tell a particular story. We didn't have a whole lot of material on Frederick Douglass, but we had a lot on Mercy and then Mercy Douglas, but they were pretty complete. It was largely the voice of leadership. And the questions that I wanted to answer, I needed to know more about the profession professional experiences, their institutional experiences of these women, and that there were some things in the records. There were other questions that I had that only the nurses could answer. And so the Bates Center already had a relationship with these nurses. I think it was the spring before I started Penn. They hosted a tea for the Mercy Douglas nurses. And yeah, and so they had a contact list. Oh, I was so lucky. They had a contact list already ready. So when I came in, I had, and the most important person was the president of their alumni association. So they still had an alumni association. They just disbanded about 2 years ago, and they gave money. The money that they had left, they gave to Bates Center. That's kind of, I contacted the president. She put me in contact with some of the nurses, and then it just kind of started from there. Initially, it was kind of difficult because these are older Black women, and when you're doing oral history work, you have to know your subjects, right? And I'm affiliated with Penn, which is this elite white institution. These women had had some bad experiences with previous researchers who happen to be white, and interviewed them, had taken their materials, some of their artifacts from nursing school, never gave them back, took their stories. They don't even know what happened to their stories. You're a senior, Black woman, people will take advantage. And so when I initially started, there was definitely a barrier that I had to kind of break through to get them to trust me. But what I did have on my side was that I am a Black nurse, a Black woman nurse, and I'm younger than them. And so I think in some ways they kind of saw me as their grandchild. And they were so proud of me too, So once I kind of got the green light from the first few people that I interviewed, I think they got on the phone and called, each other, and it's like, she's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And said I was okay. And then that just sort of opened up the door. But it was rough in the beginning. In fact, I thought that I was going to have to abandon oral history, which meant it would have been a completely different type of project if I had to rely only on the records. One of the nurses, Miss Marie Harvey, she was the first that I interviewed. And these were these are very sophisticated, elegant, regal women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I initially I was using video because I taken, you take your history courses, and the best practices is that you use both video and you have a couple of audio recorders in case something goes wrong. So I had like multiple cameras, I had recorders, and it was destroying my interviews because each piece of equipment is a different audience. And I'm talking about, I'm interviewing older Black women, and they, there's a reason why Black women don't share about our inner lives. There's always the concern about being scrutinized, your words being used against you. And so once I realized that the cameras and everything was an issue, and I got rid of it, and I was interviewing Miss Harvey, she said, when you do oral history, you send them a transcript for them to read and make any corrections or revisions, or if there are things they want to take out or add.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent me this beautiful letter. She sent the transcript back to the Bates Center, and in it, at the end of the letter, she told me, don't give up, because I was telling her how I was having such a difficult time getting nurses to agree to the interview. I would call them, they'll say, okay, sure, and call me back though, call me back in a month. And one person told me, she said she had to get her story together. She said, this been so long, you should, baby, call me back. And I said, okay, yes, ma'am. And so I called her back, and they tell you to call them back again. And then, there's medical issues, it's a couple of people I called, they had just gotten out of the hospital, it's all these different challenges. But she said, don't give up. And it was almost like she just spoke a word over me, because after that, it just took off. I spent a lot of time with these women. I think my longest interview was Miss Dolores Brewer. It was 8 hours. I went to her house at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we sat on her front porch, and she had that lemonade and sweet tea. And I'm telling you, we gossiped like two old women in the church parking lot. She told all they business. I got the whole scoop on my stuff. I could have written a dissertation off her transcript alone. Okay. And because she loved to talk. Oh, it was so good. And then I did a follow-up interview with her, and it was the same sort of thing. And it was just beautiful because they got just as much out of the interview as I did, because this is, I opened up space for them to tell their own story. I think that, I was going to say, they had kind of started this sort of competition. They would, each house I went to, they would cook for me, right?
Mhm.
And so one would say, well, I heard Marie baked you some cookies, so I done cooked you this. It was like a little competition thing going on. Oh, who could, it was great. I remember one nurse I interviewed, and she said that they kind of warned me about her. They said she tough now. She was tough in nursing school, and she's still tough now. She was the oldest nurse I interviewed. This one that was 91. And but she was a cadet nurse, and there aren't many cadet nurses still alive. Yes, but they kept saying you have to interview her because she was a cadet. And I went in her house, and because all of them with the exception of 3, I interviewed them at their home. And I went, and I walked in, and I said, oh, thank you for agreeing to talk to me, and I'm just so grateful for this, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, it ain't gonna take longer than 30 minutes. I left her house 4 hours later, because that's it. You get them, you open up, you get them to open, and they start talking. And I would always start the interview asking them about their memory of their great grandparents. And they would look shocked, because they're thinking that I'm just going to come in. I'm not, even when I explained why I wanted to interview them and what my project was about, I know that there was still this sort of element of, what does she really want from me, kind of thing. And so when I would ask the question about their great grandparents, there was just this like reaction of, oh, so you came to talk. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. let's talk about it. And that's the part of the work that you're not really prepared for, because I became close with these women. I would, some of them I went to church with. They were calling me. One nurse, she got into a habit of calling me like 5:30 in the morning. I answer, and she like, well, Martin Luther King. And I'm like, no, we not like kids at 5 o'clock in the morning. No, ma'am. In 1950, no. So, and then, they pass away.
Yeah.
And pass away. And it's hard. I intentionally avoided calling them during COVID because of their age, and I just didn't want to know. I needed to get through the dissertation. I wanted to write and remembering them in the way that the last time I saw them, I just didn't want to know. That is my favorite part of the project, is the oral history. It's just, there's just so many layers to it. Even in the dissertation, I decided I didn't paraphrase much. I used direct quotes because I wanted them to tell their story themselves. That's what I did. Yeah, so that is when you think about sort of innovative approaches to history, the way in which the Black community have used oral history as resistance. Even though the powers that be attempted to erase me and erase our stories, they are preserved through passing them on through generations. I knew this to be true just growing up in Birmingham, and which they used to call it Birmingham, because of the bombings, the KKK bombings. And my mother was the children. She was part of the children of the civil rights movement. So and they were very active. And so I grew up hearing a lot of stories about the movement, stories that, in fact, there's somebody I have to interview in my family because I'm going to write some stuff as well about some of the stuff that was going on down south. But I grew up with a very clear understanding of how powerful oral history is just from my family preserving those stories by telling them,
Mhm.
and so, yeah.
So what was the most surprising thing that you learned from the oral history? Was there anything that jumped out that was like, wow, I didn't expect that?
So oftentimes there's this characterization of, and this is political, this is self-serving, of the South as being sort of the bad guys, people sort of restrict racism to the South, whereas the North is depicted as being progressive. It was a land of refuge, of opportunity, of freedom. And then when Black folk migrated north and they realized that many of the same issues that they were facing in the South also existed in the North. But I think I was a bit surprised at the severity of racism in the Northern nursing establishment. They told very detailed stories about their experiences with discrimination, and you can't find these stories right now in the record, maybe in Darlene Clark Hines' work, because we had some overlap, and which was great for me as a new researcher. I found some of the same things that she found in her project. I was surprised a bit by their boldness, because nursing, and still in many ways today was very conservative. And nursing school was very strict, and this was across the board, Black nursing schools, white nursing schools, and there wasn't a whole lot of toleration for tolerance of defiance. I was surprised at how, at their, not that they resisted, but that they were willing to risk their jobs, for, and the demand for just treatment, to just be treated, to be treated, with dignity and respect.
Mhm.
And they would quit. That was surprising to me how they would quit a job if they felt, that they were being unfairly treated, which meant they quit a lot. But they were so confident. And that was one of the great things about Mercy Douglas was the amount of time that they spent. I think in the dissertation I talked about, like, it was almost like they were preparing them for combat, because the nursing instructors knew, because many of the instructors from Mercy Douglas came out of the South. So they had a particular orientation to white supremacy.
Mhm.
And they prepared them almost like they were going out to war.
Mhm.
And they spent a lot of time building up their confidence and who they were, not only as nurses, but just as Black women. And that became like their shield, even more than their competence, because there was no denying. If you made it through Mercy Douglas, you had no choice to be to be anything but competent, because Black hospitals were so under resourced that nurses had to, or were expected to, produce the same outcome with less than 50% of the resources. So they had to be, you talk about innovation, they had to be innovative. They had to make things work. And that was something that they all mentioned, that Mercy Douglas taught them how to improvise. And so it wasn't about their intelligence and skill. It was about being able to survive the emotional and psychological trauma, the picking away, the constant picking away at your esteem, and how they were just able to hold on, not break.
Mhm.
The stories are just, they're incredible, they're powerful. They also explain why there has been such an effort to conceal these stories. The whitewashing of nursing history. I always say that nursing history reads like the historical nursing record reads like a history of white women. And that's not accidental. That's an intentional political project.
Mhm.
And we see that right now today, this current attack on the history curricula, on 1619, on
Mhm.
critical race theory, really on anything that does not portray the United States and white people in a positive light. This is nothing new. This is part of a much longer and broader history of white elites controlling what you can know, what you can teach to suppress political dissent and to control the people, because the people are much easier to control when they're miseducated and undereducated, much easier to control, much easier to dominate. That's why enslaved people were killed for learning how to read and write. I feel so grateful, Angela, that I got to get these stories on record. And like, to me, that is my contribution. And I think that is the biggest thing that I have done in terms of this project, in terms of my nursing career, to be honest, is that these stories are going to be here forever.
Mhm.
You know, they're going to be here forever. And there are oral histories of Black nurses out there. I'm not saying that this is it, but Mercy Douglas was pretty special. I'm just grateful to just have been a part of it, and that that they were willing to share their stories with me. There is a lot that I left out of the dissertation because I have to do some more reading. You have to be gentle with some of these stories. You have to give them the serious attention and care that they deserve. Some stuff you just can't just put out there. And they share, a lot of things about their inner lives that I know we don't have a lot of material about that, because there's certain things that Black women just simply do not talk about.
Mhm.
And there was one interview I cried in the parking lot. I sobbed because I simply could not believe that she shared with me what she shared with me. And she told me that I was the only person who knew this story. And she gave me permission to share it, but we have to wait for her children to pass away because even they don't know the story.
Wow.
Yeah. And I sobbed because I just felt like I was like chosen or something. I just
Yeah.
couldn't believe I was sitting on the edge of my seat when she was telling this, telling her story. I just could not believe that she was sharing this with me.
Mhm.
And then when she finished, she kind of fell back in her seat and she let out this huge sigh, this breath. It's like you could see the weight being lifted off her shoulders. She'd been carrying this for her whole life.
Yeah.
And then that's when she said, you're the only person I've told the story to. So, when you ask that's your answer to your question. You asked me things that were shocking. I mean, I'm not going to share what she told me, but there were some stories that, things that I was not even aware of. And yeah.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying this episode, and we'll be back with more in a few minutes after this quick break.
Soothing Sense supports the Amplify Nursing podcast. Nurses are busier than ever, with even more pressure to create positive perceptions of care while keeping risks low. Quiz Ease by Soothing Sense was designed to do just that. Created by a nurse anesthetist, Quiz Ease is an innovative aromatherapy intervention that helps manage patient nausea and discomfort without IVs or a physician's order. It's entirely drug-free and non-drowsy, it smells great, and it comes in a groundbreaking inhaler system that patients can use all by themselves whenever needed. Request your sample kit today at soothing-sense.com/medical.
The thing that struck me when you were reading the chapter that you were sharing were the barriers in high school that were put in place in high school and elementary school that precluded these women from even pursuing a nursing education because they were ranked in such a way that they weren't giving the coursework that would then allow them to go forward into a professional nursing program. And that as high school students, they were taking night classes to try and fulfill those requirements so that they could eventually go to nursing school. And to me, that was such a shocking thing.
Yeah.
That it was a profound change in how I started to look at things. And it was incredible to me that they worked so hard to get themselves to a place where they could pursue their education. Because I knew for me as a teenager, I'd be at the drive-thru at McDonald's. Like I'd be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to nursing school, and that drive at such a young age and knowing that they had so much more to offer than what they were being told is incredible.
Yeah. And the thing is, inequality in public education and how, back to how I kind of started this and talking about who has choice, that's still happening today.
Yeah.
Who has access to the resources and the opportunities to meet the admission criteria for Penn nursing. These things are shaped by race and class. And even as we say these policies are race neutral, they're not, because racism is baked into the system. It determines whether or not, as in that chapter 1 of their ability to even satisfy the course, the prerequisite, requirements. All of this was being shaped by this racialized system. Even students who, because I think I don't know if I told that story during the seminar talk, but even students who did meet the criteria and were initially accepted until they got to the interview and they realized that they were Black, and then they told them that they rescinded the offer. I wrote in the conclusion that the dismantling of Jim Crow did not mean the end of racial exclusion. It just meant the invention of new, covert, sophisticated ways to exclude. Today, it's illegal to say that you can't get in because you're Black or because you're Asian or whatever. But they find other ways. Maintain whiteness, structural whiteness. Yeah, it's interesting when you see the evolution of these things and why we're dealing with what we're dealing with and witnessing what we're witnessing in nursing today. After having studied all of this stuff, it's just so clear that the trajectory. And though nursing has definitely made progress in terms of being a more diverse profession along ethnic, gender, racial, sexual, religious lines, the hierarchy, it was just expanded to include more individuals. But white nurses continue to hoard the power and status and resources. That did not change. The hierarchy of humanity of that wasn't significantly altered. It's still the same. We're still fighting the same system. We're still in the same system. And so, I'm working on a paper right now about this very long campaign by nurse elites to raise the status of nursing, primarily through nursing education reform. And that always entailed gatekeeping who could hold the title of professional nurse. Black women, just like a certain extent, immigrant women, but after a while, if you had white color skin, then that was enough. Men, poor women who were excluded. This campaign continues today. It was in 1948 that the Brown Report was released that recommended that the bachelor's be the entry-level degree into nursing practice. And you see, we're still on that. That's still being pushed, and a very large vocal group that supports the closing of associate degree nursing programs. Well, associate degree nursing programs educate a disproportionate number of racial minorities.
Mhm.
And on the surface, it looks like, it's just we want to improve nursing, but it's never just been about improving nursing. It's always improving nursing has always meant whitening nursing, keeping nursing white and middle class, which meant the initiatives, legislation has always functioned in a way to keep certain groups out. And
Mhm.
so, but you gotta know history to know the racial politics that's undergirding a lot of this stuff. Gotta know the backstory, the origin.
It's part of the reason why I was so interested in your work is because I'm really interested in how we ended up here on all levels.
Yeah.
I focus a lot, I work a lot in advocacy for my profession, and how we got here in this position that we're in now is so incredibly important. And not knowing that history and not understanding how those structures were put into place is a huge detriment to being able to move forward, because you can't dismantle something that you don't see.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And that's why it's been so important, and I'm excited to see this, it's small but it's growing movement to decolonize the nursing curriculum, which necessarily, it includes decolonizing nursing history. You got to tell the truth.
Mhm.
This is about truth telling. Part of nursing's social currency has been this image of sanctity, of innocence. So, it's part of the social construct of white middle class womanhood. I mean, that was the basis of the modern trained nurse, that whole social construct. And so there has been, an intentional effort to conceal these types of history. The projects that I'm doing right now, well, one of them in particular is about centering, this is part of the PMAS project that I'm working with, as a postdoc with PRSS.
Mhm.
PMAS stands for Penn Medicine in the Afterlives of Slavery Project. This is an initiative that was launched by Dorothy Roberts by the request of President Gutman, that builds on the Penn and Slavery Project. So, the Penn and Slavery Project investigate and document the university's connections to the institution of slavery. And so PMAS now looks at the continuous consequences of enslavement on medicine and nursing. And so one project that I'm working on is about centering, recognizing and centering the contributions of Black doctors and nurses who were Penn graduates. And not just any graduate. I mean, these were people who made substantial contributions to the development of American healthcare. But as we've discussed, their contributions have been nearly erased. And the project really grew out of my dissertation that I told you, focused on Mercy Douglas. And I mentioned that Dr. Nathan Moselle, who was the founder of Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital and Training School. He was also the first Black person to graduate from Penn Medicine. He was treated horribly as both a student and later as a medical practitioner in Philadelphia. And so what I'm thinking about is, how has Penn Medicine, to what extent have they recognized his contributions? Because I've gotten the support from Dorothy for this, and we're thinking about different forms of recognition. Is there even a lectureship in his honor? Is there, when they're teaching medical history, is he even mentioned? I mean, this was the probably most significant figure when we talk about the history of Black Philadelphia healthcare, and he was the first Black graduate from Penn. But there are reasons why they would not mention him, because of the severe racial hostility and discrimination that he faced when he was both a student and a physician. And my hope is, if this really works the way I wanted to, that we can then expand to Penn nursing, look at Minnie Clemens, who was the first Black woman, first Black person to graduate from HUP, from Penn nursing. You know, she's not even really, I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't really hear anything about her when I was a student. We don't have any records on her in the Bates Center. You know, this project really, you know, it asked the questions around, you know, what does it mean to celebrate and honor those who were either, you know, indifferent to or upheld racial caste while ignoring those who fought against racial injustice? You know, why do we celebrate Nightingale, who supported British colonialism and was anti-Black, while ignoring Sojourner Truth and Mabel Stoppers and Estelle Riddle, who were freedom fighters? You know, why do the narratives around these great white nurse pioneers, why do they dominate our understanding of what counts as history? You know, these are the types, this is what I'm doing with this, you know, with this project. And the idea is to really push us to think about, how can you say that you are anti-racist or you embrace anti-racism while simultaneously promoting and upholding white supremacy ideology? And we do this in various ways. It's in the textbooks, you know, it's on the walls of the nursing school. Whose portraits are on the walls of the nursing school? You know, it's in the Nurses Week celebration. Who are we celebrating every year? It's the same folk. You know, it's in the archives. You know, Mercy Douglas is doing a lot of diversity laboring, and I've had conversations with Julie about this, so this is not a surprise. You know, they're doing a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of diversity laboring in that archive, because they're the only collection of a Black nursing school in there. That is sort of the intent of that particular project. And we'll see what happens. I'm going to do a presentation. We have a symposium this spring, and I'm going to talk about Moselle and my ideas around this. You know, a lot of institutions across the country who've been studying their connections to enslavement have been taking down monuments. You know, why isn't there an endowed chair in Minnie Clemens' name? You know, why isn't there a portrait of her? Why don't anyone know who don't we hear this name? You know, what, you know, it's just, you know, these are the questions that you have to ask, you know, and you can't actually be serious about this work and while also reproducing whiteness. You just can't. And that's not to say that we should stop talking about Nightingale. Nightingale has made some absolutely incredible contributions to nursing. I mean, that they say the founder of modern trained nursing, but she was also an imperialist. And that story has to be told. And we have to deal with the messiness. When people say things like, well, she was a woman of her time, well, that's dehumanizing. You know, that's dehumanizing, because there was never a point in history when Black people were not human. So to say that she's a woman of her time, you are not only denying Black humanity, but you're ignoring the efforts of many people, Black and white, abolitionists who fought against anti-Black racism, Jim Crow, slave, you know, indigenous genocide. You know, you're saying that everybody didn't believe this stuff.
Right.
You know, there were people who knew that this was inhumane. Nightingale supported genocidal attack on indigenous people. And, you know, we have to tell, it's time to tell the truth. You know, there's a lot of ways that we're approaching this that's not going to lead to structural change. It just allows you to give the appearance as though things are, you know, you're making a difference or you're changing things, but really the system and the hierarchy remains intact. The structures remain intact. You know, I'm not, you know, when people say, you know, we have to expand the record to be more inclusive, that sounds like the record is accurate. It sounds like you're baking a cake and this is the batter, this is the base, and then we just gonna sprinkle some stuff in there. No, 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 no. No, the batter is wrong. The foundation has to be completely dismantled. This is what abolitionists mean when they say the system cannot be reformed. You have to completely dismantle the system. The record has to be rewritten. When people start talking about radical, this is the real work. There are a lot of folk who won't support this. And when you think about it, it makes sense because, how many people are actually willing to give up their privilege, willingly relinquish their privilege in order to achieve true liberation, true freedom. We romanticize this stuff. We romanticize our revolutionary leaders and radicalism and all of this stuff, but people forget people died. A lot of folks died.
Mhm.
It's always a sacrifice. White people have never voluntarily given up their privilege. Black people have always had to fight. I just think that we have to ask some really serious and hard questions that people don't want to answer. Part of what makes Penn nursing elite is that it's so white.
Mhm.
So what would that mean if it wasn't so white anymore? Does that mean it's no longer elite? Who's going to be okay with that?
I completely agree with you. I mean, we tend to have this very finite mindset. And if I'm elite, therefore you cannot be.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And I think we just need to flip the whole script and say, you can be elite in you and your story and yourself. And I too can be elite in my story and myself. And until we get to that point where that fear of I'm not going to have it is there, then we're not going to be able to continue to move forward. But the one thing doesn't necessarily have to impact the other. It's this scarcity mindset that we have, that if you succeed and you do really well, then therefore it's going to take something away from me. And it's not true. It's really not true. I've found that I get the most out of, and I become a better person the more I support and encourage and help to grow other people. I get better and better with that, with every person that I mentor, with every student that I mentor, with every, that was a big part of the reason why Mary and I started this podcast, is that there's so much out there that nurses do that people don't see and people don't hear. And, we want to make sure that we, amplify all of those voices so that people can see all the great things that people are doing. And it's not about us. It's about the group, and it's about the profession, and it's about all the great things that people are doing. And none of that takes away from me. That's the part that's I find so strange, is that none of that takes away from me. So why are people so afraid? It's a big mindset change. I don't know. I feel like it's coming. I could probably be a little bit naive. I feel like it's something that we're getting closer to approaching. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I don't know. Past few years, I just hope that people are recognizing what is happening and how a serious fight that we're in. Civil rights legislation being peeled back. But Black folks are back to fighting for voting rights. We're fighting for abortion rights. It's one thing after the other. And now we're fighting to be able to read and learn what you want to read and learn. I mean, that's it's not headed in a good direction. And I've told all of my friends, and I'll tell you this, save your books, because we're headed to a place where books are going to be valuable, because certain things you're just not going to be supposedly allowed to read. And we can't say that this is like that's ridiculous. No, there is a point in time where people were killed for learning how to read, for knowing how, this is America. This has happened. Black studies, Black people had Black scholars had to fight for a Black studies program, in Philadelphia during the 60s, they had to fight to get Black history included in the curriculum. I mean, these are not, all of this stuff has a history, and it's, my concern, I think, is just that, and I think also because we are being bombarded, it's every day, it's something different, it's something else. I think people are exhausted, frustrated, but we can't give up. we're in a serious fight. Now we need all hands, everybody needs to be on board. I think now there's another project that I'm working on with Dr. Fairman, Julie Fairman, and it's a project to investigate the connections between Penn Medical School, the early medical school, and HUP training school. So let me just give a little bit of a backstory. So, as I mentioned, PMAS, the Penn Medicine and Afterlife of Slavery Project, focuses on the history of the medical school and its ties to slavery, as well as the institution's use and treatment of African descendant people, both as patients. I'm sure you're familiar with medical experimentation and as medical practitioners. It just is so beautiful because it just keeps building. So they started with Penn and Slavery Project. Now we're building up with PMAS. And now Julie and I are thinking now, okay, now where does nursing sort of fit in all of this? Well, Penn's early medical school was one of the key producers and disseminators of scientific racism. And they taught this race-based medical knowledge to medical students who then graduated, and many of them went down south, and they also were very instrumental in helping to sustain the institution of slavery. But some of these physicians also taught HUP nursing students. And this is because, this is very common because at this time, trained nursing was just founded. So there was no body of nursing faculty. So physicians would teach, taught the first sort of group of nurses. And that practice actually continued well into the mid 20th century because there was also a faculty nursing shortage. And so physicians would kind of volunteer to teach nursing students. Our project probes whether these physicians from Penn Medical School transmitted this race-based medical knowledge to HUP nursing students. What's driving this question is this sort of bigger question around how did the notion of biological race enter into nursing education? Because PMAS is doing work in finding that Penn Medicine was a key producer and circulator of these ideas. And this is how it circulated in medicine. And so, where did these ideas come from in nursing? Because we know just in the research that I've done that nurses, white nurses absolutely promoted scientific, racism, these ideas around, biological racial hierarchies. And so we're still in the early stages of the project. And so I don't have any findings to share just yet, but it does have the potential to make a big impact. The work that they've done in the medical school has led to policy changes. We'll see what this would mean for, how we teach and use race as a variable in research, how we teach about it in nursing education, also in nursing practice. We oftentimes use race as a proxy for culture. That was something that I noticed in anesthesia when I worked in the PACU, racial disparities in pain management. And they were calling it cultural competency, but it was not, it was medical racism, and it was rooted in these old ideas about these so-called differences in Black and white bodies and Black and white and brown bodies, and, who could tolerate pain, who's more sensitive, whose pain is real, whose pain is normal, So that's a very exciting project.
That is an exciting project. All right. So as much as I would love to continue this conversation, I could do it for hours and hours.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to be cognizant of your time, and I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate your work and your expertise. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out next. And it was such a pleasure.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It was great. I enjoyed it. And good luck to you too.
Hello, Marion.
Hello, Angela. How's it going?
It's amazing. How are you?
I am great. I can't tell you how much I loved listening to your conversation with Dr. Anchrum. Like, seriously, she is an amazing storyteller, and I could have just listened to her all day.
I know I was so excited for that interview. It was really, really good. And she's doing such really incredibly important work. We, I think, in nursing, don't have a great sense of our own history. And I think it's so important that everybody understand where it is that we're coming from. Her research about Black women trying to become nurses in the 1950s and 60s and all the barriers they had to overcome is a really important story to tell.
Yeah, and I think, she says it really well in her interview. We really need to understand the origin story of nursing and where we're at now and how that all plays together and who gets to tell that story. It reminded me of Raven's interview and the project that she's working on, Nurses You Should Know project, trying to highlight the history of the nursing profession, but the history of Black nurses within the nursing profession.
Yeah, totally. They're both doing the same thing in different ways, and I think they're both doing a phenomenal job of it. It's just incredibly important, especially when you consider, where does policy come from? Where does the attitudes and culture of nursing come from? This is where it comes from. And if we don't take a hard look at where it came from, we're not going to be able to make changes.
Well, Angela, this was the last episode of season 4, and we hope everybody enjoyed this short season. We will be back with you in 2022 for season 5, and we hope everybody has a healthy, safe new year.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary, and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, with special thanks to our Department of Information Technology Services for their assistance. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.